Welcome to an edition of CCSC Living Environment. Today we're going to talk about biomes. A biome is a geographical region that contains common climates, flora, and fauna. The flora of an area are the plants. The fauna of an area is the animals. If you need a trick to remember those, flora kind of sounds like flower, fauna kind of sounds like fawn, so those would be your plants and animals in an area. We're going to start off looking at terrestrial or land biomes. With terrestrial biomes, it only makes up about 25% of the Earth's surface. It's not very much. One of the major things that contributes or changes our terrestrial biomes is the climate. Remember, the climate is the temperature and moisture in an area. The climate will determine what plants will grow and defines the land biome. The land biomes really are all about the climate that's there. Climate will change with latitude. Remember, latitude is the distance north or south of the equator, and with altitude. And altitude is the height above the Earth's surface or the height above sea level. So those two things, latitude and altitude, can change your climate. If you remember from earth science, when you talked about the globe, when you talked about the Earth, if you start at 0 degrees, if you start at the equator, it's warm and wet. If you go 30 degrees, north or south, it's warm or dry. Another 30 degrees and you get cold and wet. And then finally that last 30 degrees, so you're at the poles, you're at cold and dry. Now, based on that temperature and moisture, that's going to determine the climate of that area. So the first one that we're going to look at is what we call the tundra. The tundra is cold and dry. So basically we're all the way up. We're way up toward the top, almost to 90 degrees north. It's less than 10 inches of precipitation annually, not much rain or water. Has a very short summer with a constant daylight. Kind of a cool story to share with you. When a few years ago we went on an Arctic cruise. And when we were up there, it was at the time of year where there are 24 hours of daylight. It was probably the most fascinating thing I've ever experienced in my life. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun's out on one side of you. 2 o'clock in the morning, the sun's out on the opposite side of you. The sun never went down. It was always there. And you just learn to adjust to that because when you're tired, you just go to bed. But it was really such a cool thing to experience that the sun was constantly basically just spinning right over your head. It was so neat. In the tundra, the soil contains something called permafrost. With permafrost, it means that the ground is completely frozen, about a meter below the surface. Remember, a meter is about 3 feet. So if you dig down, at 1 meter, you're going to hit solid ground. You're going to hit frozen ground. You can't dig into that. Usually here in the spring and the fall, that melts. And our ground isn't frozen. We can dig wells, we can build houses, things like that. If you're in the tundra, that ground stays frozen, and you can only get down about 3 feet. Vegetation is mosses, lichens, and grasses, things that don't require a lot of water since there isn't water there. And many of the animals are there in the summer, but not in the winter. As you could probably imagine, it's not the most pleasant place in the wintertime. So if they're there in the summer, what are they? They're usually migratory animals like birds. So they come in, they hang out for the summer, but then they go back away again. That takes us down to what we call the taiga. The taiga is the evergreen forest. Generally speaking, with the taiga, it's got lichens and mosses on the floor. It is warmer and wetter than the tundra. It's got a 5 to 7th month winter. The soil is mostly needles. Needles don't break down. They don't decompose very well, so the soil isn't super rich. It's difficult for things to grow in the taiga, but these evergreen trees have adapted to that, and they grow very well, actually. There's a nickname for the taiga, which is the spruce moose biome. That's because the spruce are the dominant plant, the moose is the dominant animal. So it's kind of picked up this nickname as time has gone on. Where is the taiga? This is not the taiga. Even though it says 5 to 7 month winter, it's not here. You need to go further north, more up into Canada. That's when you fall actually into the taiga. So what do we fall under? We fall under what they call the temperate deciduous forest. The temperate deciduous forest has broadleaf deciduous trees. New York State is a temperate deciduous forest. It's a 5 to 8 month growing season. So instead of saying a 5 to 7 month winter, things change up a little bit. It's a 5 to 8 month growing season. And we have pretty fertile soil, which they didn't have in the taiga. We're able to grow many more things, whether it's a farm or just your yard, whatever it happens to be. We can grow a lot more in the temperate deciduous forest because the soil is so much more fertile or capable of allowing things to grow in it. So we're not really going to move down. And again, when I say down, I don't mean down as in down the board. I mean down as in down the globe. We're going to move over, and we're going to move into the grasslands. The temperature is very similar between the grasslands and the temperate deciduous forest. The difference is in the precipitation. They don't have as much water. Rainfall is definitely the limiting factor. You don't get the trees. The trees require so much more water. The roots have to go and find that water in the ground, and that water just isn't there in the grasslands. So there's enough to support the grasses, but not to support the tree life. Something to point out in the grasslands is that fires actually restore life to the soil. When those fires go through, it rebuilds the soil. It puts nutrients back to the soil to allow things to grow. So fires are actually kind of a vital part of the grasslands. So yeah, it's good to put them out so they don't spread and become out of control, but we can't completely make them go away because it restores so much to the balance of that ecosystem. The next step down would be to go to our desert. So now we've gone from cold and dry in the tundra to warm and dry in the desert. The rainfall is less than 10 inches annually, so very similar there. Temperatures may be cold to hot with extreme daily fluctuations. Why is that? When the sun is out during the day, it is so hot outside. But when the sun goes down at night, it cools off so much. Remember, land has a tendency to heat up very, very fast, but then it cools down almost as quickly, if not faster. So you can get super hot temperatures during the day and very cool temperatures at night. Generally speaking, deserts are found in the rain shadows of mountains. And finally, if we move down from warm and dry, we come to warm and wet, which is going to be our tropical rainforest. It is the most productive terrestrial biome. There's over 80 inches of rainfall annually. That's a lot of water. Has a year-long growing season. So you think, cool, then let's just go farming in the tropical rainforest. Well, there's a problem. When we look at the soils in the tropical rainforest, they're what they call lateritic, meaning they're loose and sandy. But if you start to farm in those soils, they become very brick-like. So when people try to move into the tropical rainforest, figuring it's going to be wet and it's going to be warm enough to have a year-long growing season, what they find is that the soil doesn't cooperate. And the soil becomes very difficult to farm because it almost becomes like a brick. So it's certainly not the best place to try to do farming. So now that we've moved through our land biomes, we're going to take a look at aquatic or water biomes. The water biomes are over 75% of the earth. Remember, the land was 25, so the water's 75. The conditions stay fairly constant over a wide range, and they change very, very slowly. Now, why is that? Because temperature variations are not as great because of the ability of water to hold and absorb heat. So we said that the land will cool quickly and it heats up quickly. The water's the exact opposite. Water will heat up very slowly, but it holds on to that water. It takes much longer for water to cool down. We're familiar with that because of lake effect snow. When the lakes hold on to that warm water, as the cold air comes across, it picks up more of that water, hits the cold land again, and dumps all that snow back out. Good for snow days, not always great for other things. The other thing is that water is not a limiting factor. If you're in the water, water would not be your limiting factor. First, we're going to look at the marine or saltwater biomes. These are our oceans. It is the most stable aquatic biome. It's actually the most stable biome on Earth, really, because the temperature fluctuations just aren't there. It's not a concern, and water is not a limiting factor. It helps to stabilize the Earth's atmosphere. Again, it's because of that property of water to hold on to that heat. And that really does help the atmosphere of the Earth. The most important thing that we're going to talk about in the ocean is this stuff called phytoplankton. Basically, algae in the ocean. Now, the question becomes, why is the algae so important to me? I live quite a ways away from the ocean. I don't eat what comes out of the ocean, so why am I concerned about that? Well, if you think about here in the wintertime, our trees lose their leaves. Our ground gets covered with snow. If you think about the desert, there aren't a lot of trees. There is no grass. So how do those areas have enough oxygen for everything to survive? Because photosynthesis is basically stopped. There's nothing green outside undergoing photosynthesis. Where do I get my oxygen from? I know I need oxygen. Well, those phytoplankton in the ocean are producing the oxygen. They carry out 70% of the Earth's total photosynthesis. They're providing the oxygen for the whole globe. It's because of those phytoplankton in the ocean that we have the oxygen we need to survive. So it's a very important thing to protect that ecosystem of the ocean. Not to mention, the animals that live in the ocean certainly eat those phytoplankton, so that also provides an important thing in the ecosystem as well. So we said water isn't a limiting factor. Okay, so then what is a limiting factor for life in the ocean? Salinity, or the salt content, which is usually about 3.5%. Remember, salt water is more dense than regular water, and that plays a role, or that plays a factor in the organisms that are living there. Temperature is a limiting factor. Light will only penetrate about 200 meters into water. That's about 600 feet. That's not very deep. So what that's telling you is those phytoplankton stay toward the top and plants don't grow on the bottom. So what does that do to your animal life? Well, that means that only certain organisms can live toward the bottom, and the organisms that need more of the plant life or more of the phytoplankton are going to stay toward the top. So it creates this dynamic in the ocean depending on the depth of the water. And finally, the tides. Remember, tides are when the water rises and falls daily. It does it twice a day, and that's because of the gravitational pull of the moon. So the tides play a big role in how the ocean reacts and what the ocean actually does. So you've probably heard of tidal pools, or maybe you've had the opportunity to see them. When the tide goes out, organisms get left in these little places. Hopefully they have enough water and they don't dry out, but they also have to worry about predation because they don't have all of the ocean to protect them. So the tides really play a huge role in what's going on in the ocean, and it does become a limiting factor to the life that's there. So now we've looked at the marine, or the saltwater biome, and the last one that's left is the freshwater. The freshwater biomes, the freshwater ecosystem, is divided into two groups. We have the running water and the standing water. Less than 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water, and 2/3 of that is frozen. Most of the rest of the water, so the other third, is underground as what we call groundwater. So when it comes to fresh water, there really isn't a lot of fresh water on Earth. And it's very important that we protect the fresh water that we do have, because it is so important, it is so critical to our survival to have that fresh water. And there's just not a lot of it out there. I hope you enjoyed the video today on biomes. I'll see you next time.